Hey YouTube, let me grab TikTok. I want to get this started because I want to be really focused and to the point today. I'm going to try to ignore the trolls and really get into where money comes from, because this is the type of stuff that even people that are awake go their entire lives without really understanding where money comes from. How does the Fed make money? And really, the Fed collaborates with the government in the process of creating money, and then of course the Fed itself is a corporation which has owners, but because of mergers and sales and whatnot over the years, it's really impossible to track, well, at least to my knowledge so far, to track who owns the Fed. I mean, I think I know who owns it, but just look who started it. But we're going to talk about money, and this will be pretty cool. So, 3, 2, 1. Good morning, TikTok. Good morning, Stephanie. It is a nice chilly day here in the sunny South, and I absolutely love it. I think next week I'll probably have to get out my classicallearner.com beanie hats, and that'll be pretty fun. But enough about me. Today we are talking about money. Today we are talking about where money comes from. And to me, this is something that's so important because when I think of myself as a homeschool educator, one of the things that I really want to make sure I do a good job of is educating my children so that they are financially literate. Now, there are multiple aspects of that, right? You get back to the basics. What is money? What does money represent? How do you make money? What is an asset? What is a liability? But today we're going to take a little bit of a different direction, and we're going to talk about how the Federal Reserve Bank collaborates with the United States government, the Department of Treasury, to make money. Where does money come from? And when you're taxed, and this will come full circle, after this, you will never, I promise you, you will never look at money the same way after this talk, and you have never heard it broken down in this way. After this, you'll understand not only where the money comes from. Yes, Big Bear inspired this. I watched his stream, and then I put together a whole unit study on it. Owen Benjamin did a great talk on this. So you will understand not only how money is created and where it comes from, but what your tax money actually goes to and what it's designed to actually, who it's actually paying back, right? Because we think our tax money is going to the roads and to social programs like Medicaid, Medicare, right? And that's part of the equation. But the majority of your tax money, well, you'll understand where it goes after this. So, why does money get printed? It starts out with politicians, right? And politicians stand in front of society and they say, we have all these problems, right? Usually it's either war, social programs, or public works, right? So they'll say, there's something going on across the world and we need money to fund a war. There are homeless people in the streets. We need public housing. We need food stamps. We need Social Security, Medicaid, right? The type of thing the politicians say, or they'll say free college for everyone or free health care for everyone, right? So they'll say we need war money, we need social program money, or just public works and the everyday running of the government, right? Whether that be police forces, whether that be the environmental agency, whatever it is, whether that be the CIA, right? So the government has its money. The politicians come out and they say, we need money to do these things. And the public goes and they vote. And no matter which way they vote, whether they're voting for the social programs or the wars, either way, the politicians are creating a binary where they're saying to the public, we need to print this money. And after we get through this talk, you'll understand why that is. Because the politicians really represent the bankers who fund them. And people think they represent the people, but they represent these banks. So the politicians give you a reason, and they want you to attach to that reason. Social programs, war. So they get the go-ahead, and the government needs to raise money. So the Treasury Department issues what's called Treasury Bonds. And Treasury Bonds are essentially, when I say a bond, think of it as an IOU, right? So the Treasury Department issues Treasury Bonds, and they put them up for auction. And who could buy them at auction? Well, you and I can, but you know who buys a lot of them? The banks. So these gigantic banks, but in the context that we're talking about, smaller banks, go to the Treasury and they say, I'll buy your bonds. And they give the government money. And now the government can take that money and use it to fund their social programs or whatnot. But when they buy those bonds, or their wars, but when they buy those bonds, the government makes a promise. It's really a loan, not right? They say buy, but really when the government loans the bond, essentially, the government is agreeing to pay back the purchaser of that bond, that bank, all of the money it costs to buy the bond, plus interest. And when this comes full circle, you'll understand what that really means. So then the banks, the smaller banks that bought that bond from the government, they turn around, and this is why it really is clever. Like, the Federal Reserve doesn't just print money, they get the government to promise to pay them. It's brilliant. So the banks then turn around and they go to the Federal Reserve and they say, I have this Treasury bond from the United States government, and the United States government has guaranteed that they will pay back all of this money, plus interest, to whoever owns the bond. Now, I paid, so here's what the little banks will say. I'm just using numbers here. I'm just throwing something out. So they'll say, I just bought $1 billion in bonds from the Treasury Department. Well, I'll sell them to you, Federal Reserve, for $1.5 billion. And the banks turn around, they flip that bond, and they just made a profit, right? The Federal Reserve Bank buys that bond from the small banks. Now remember, this is a Treasury bond issued by the United States government. So the Federal Reserve Bank buys that Treasury bond that was originally issued by the United States government and must be paid back plus interest by the United States government. So the Federal Reserve Bank writes a check, writes a check and buys that bond. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. So now the Federal Reserve Bank owns that bond. They own that bond, and they have to be paid back by the United States government the full cost of the bond plus interest in 30 years. But what did they use to buy the bond? This is where you understand how corrupt the system is. The Federal Reserve, don't let the name fool you. They don't buy that bond with money that they have sitting in a bank account. I'll go back and answer all your questions, but I got to get through this. So they don't buy that bond with money that's been sitting in a bank account. The Federal Reserve Bank doesn't have money. What they do is once that bond is offered for sale, they say, okay, they print the money. So the money didn't exist. So it doesn't matter what the cost of the bond was, right? They print the money and then use the money they just printed to buy that Treasury bond from the banks. So the Federal Reserve Bank just bought a Treasury bond that has to be paid back, the full cost of it plus interest in 30 years, with money that didn't exist. They just printed that money. Now, who is the Federal Reserve? We'll talk about that, but if you look into it, they pay their stockholders, their shareholders, a 6% dividend every quarter, I believe, or every half year, which means if they have stocks, that they are a corporation. So there is a corporation operating in the United States of America that prints money that doesn't exist out of nothing, buys Treasury bonds with that money, the bonds issued by our government, and then the government has to pay back the full cost of that bond plus interest in 30 years. The banks then take that money and they circulate it out into society. And by the way, for anyone saying, oh my God, look how corrupt they are, I'm about to break down why you're just as responsible for America's debt and this corrupt system as the banks. I mean, I already kind of covered it because we vote for these wars. We vote for this government spending and the social programs, right? So we are, in a way, giving them the go-ahead to do it, but it gets worse than that. So they buy the Treasury bonds from the smaller banks with the money they just printed, and the smaller banks could now put that money into circulation, and people are working as police officers and firefighters, and that money goes into...
Can you help me tie the tails onto a middle?
Yes, but take it to mommy because daddy's in the middle of something, okay? So they put that money into circulation, and it goes to government officials and wherever it goes to. So now people make money, right? So maybe someone's working for the Department of Health and they get that check, right? So now they take their money that they made, maybe they made $100,000 this year. So they take that $100,000 and they deposit that money, and I'm just using easy numbers, they deposit that money into a bank account, right? Most people don't know this, but when you deposit that money into a bank account, they're not holding your money. That deposit, that actually, what that legally means is you loaned the bank your money. You loan them your money, and they actually, within certain restrictions, they could literally invest or gamble that money on the stock market, or they could loan that money back out. This is the second way money is created, and this is the majority of money that's created. You're responsible for it. So you put $100,000 into the bank, and sorry, my phone's falling. You put $100,000 into the bank, and the bank writes something called a bank credit. This is what's happening now is fractional reserve banking. So they write a bank credit for $90,000, right? And then they take $10,000 and they put it in a safe. They can now take, hold on, it says my reception cut. They can now take $90,000 of that $100,000 and loan it out to someone else. So someone comes along and they say, I want to buy a house. And they say, oh, great. Johnny just gave us $100,000. We're going to loan you $90,000 of that $100,000. So let me just, again, I want to make sure you understand it. You go to the bank. You put $100,000 in the bank. The bank puts $10,000 in a safe and then takes $90,000 and loans it out to someone else. So they take that money and they use that money to buy a mortgage. That money that they used to get the house, right? That money gets deposited back in the bank, right? Everyone gets their money, they put it right back in the bank. So now they take $90,000, they deposit it into the bank. The bank, based on the 10% rule, can now, the bank, based on that 10% rule, now takes $9,000 of that 90 and they put it in a safe. And they take $81,000 of that 90 and they could loan out $81,000 to the next guy that wants to buy a car or wants to buy a bank. So then that guy gets $81,000 from the bank. He takes it, gets a house, gets a car, whatever he gets. I don't care what he gets. That money gets deposited back into the bank, and they could do the 10% rule again and loan the money out to someone else. And that original $100,000 that you deposited into the bank becomes $900,000 in loans that the bank gives out to other people. The bank never had that money. Every time they give a mortgage, they are creating new money. Every time the bank loans people money for cars, for mortgages, they're loaning money that didn't exist. That's how money is created. And they could turn $100,000 into 1 million total dollars. 100,000 they have to keep on hand, and $900,000 that they could loan out. This is fractional reserve bank. And by the way, they don't even have to do 10% anymore. The laws changed, but this is what it was, and it's simpler this way. Now they could do basically 0%. They have to keep on hand. It's crazy. So when you go to the bank and you say, I want to take out a mortgage, and they give you that loan, they're loaning you money that didn't exist. So what they do is they type numbers into a computer screen, and now on their computer ledger, there's more money in circulation. Now it's not real. It's not there. So, and then you have to pay back the bank all of that money plus interest on money they printed. It didn't exist that they loaned to you. Right? And this is how the majority of money is created. So every time, that's why when people are like, I'm so mad at the Fed, like, you're just as guilty as the Fed. Every time we go to the bank and we say, I want that mortgage, we are giving the bank permission to print more money, and we're playing right into their system, and we're screwing our neighbor because that creates the inflation, which makes the cost of everything go up. Which leads us to a few lies. One, when politicians, even the so-called good ones, say that we need to balance the budget, you can't balance the budget. There is more money in debt than there is physical money in the world. Let me repeat this. They will not let people understand this. Our money is debt. There is more money in debt than there is physical money in the world. And because of that, they always need inflation. That's why they're like, oh no, inflation. No. The controllers of this world will manufacture social engineer events so that they have to print money. Because as soon as they stop, the entire deck of cards collapses. Because everything is debt. And they have to pay back the Federal Reserve Bank on each Treasury bond they buy every 30 years, or the entire system collapses. So this is why they manufacture wars. This is why they manufacture social problems. This is why, I don't know, there might have been an event in March of 2020 which led to the printing of more money than any time in the history of humanity. Did you ever think maybe a big part of that was they were trying to find a reason to print money to fight off a financial collapse? So they need to inflate. Inflation, the definition of that is the expansion of the money supply. And they are constantly looking for ways to expand the money supply. Now, here's the kicker. So, for those of you that missed the beginning of this, let me give you a quick recap. The way this all starts is the Treasury Department, the United States government, issues bonds. A bond is an IOU. Those bonds eventually get purchased by the Federal Reserve Bank, and the Federal Reserve Bank writes a check, and the federal government agrees to pay the Fed back the full cost of that bond plus interest in 30 years. Now, the check that the Federal Reserve wrote, that wasn't from money that existed. They literally print that money and then buy the bond. So they don't have to have money to buy the bond. They're printing, so they're just getting free bonds from the government, basically. Here's the kicker. When the government promises to pay the Fed back, how do you think they're doing that? What they're saying is, they're selling you and your children. What they're saying is, we promise you, I, the government, promise the Federal Reserve Bank that I will tax the people of America for the next 30 years, and I will take their money and use it to pay you back, plus interest. So the Federal Reserve Bank buys you from the government, or they buy your labor, they buy the labor of your children and your grandchildren, and they do it with money that never existed in the first place. And that financial structure 99% of the people who are even awake to the world go their entire lives without understanding. For anyone interested in what I do and kind of an oversimplification, yeah, Michael. By the way, I mean, imagine hearing that and like, come on, I'm sure you're trying to help, but come on. All right. The intense complexity of what I just broke down. But you have to oversimplify it. They purposely make it very complex so that the public doesn't understand it. And for anyone who is interested in this stuff and anyone who wants their children to really understand this, I run a homeschool company, www.classicallearner.com. Our private homeschool community is Homeschools Connected. We have a unit study on this, and we really focus on financial education, skill development, entrepreneurial experience. And if you join, it's called Homeschools Connected, and it is $10 a month with the coupon code FREEDOM, all lowercase and no spaces. So I'm going to go back now and answer your questions, but I really wanted to get through this talk because it's a very complex topic that all of our children should understand, and the majority of people go their whole lives, they don't understand it. So, yeah, give me control of a nation's money supply, and I care not who makes its laws. And that was Meyer Rothschild, I believe. And the Rothschilds, they had the father, and he had 5 sons, and he sent his sons to different places in the world, one to England, one to France, different countries, and they started central banks in each country, and then they set up this system. So it's all very controlled, and but the good thing is once you understand it, you can use it to your advantage. And anyway, I'm going to go back and answer your questions. Yeah, so the link to my profile doesn't work, and I believe the reason for that is a certain platform that I'm on always finds creative ways. It's like weird because they allow me to, it's so weird, but they find creative ways to limit me. For those of you not familiar with my work, I have had multiple accounts shut down with really big eyeball reach. So it's just part of the game. But if you want to find my stuff, go to www.classicallearner.com, and that's where it's at. Your mom likes them. All right. All right. I love all your content. Thank you. Wow, I never thought of all this. Yeah, I mean, this stuff, they go great lengths so that the public can't understand this stuff. But if you break it down step by step, you could get a pretty good overview of how things like this work. The fact checkers probably love you. Yeah, I mean, these people are, these organizations are all paid. They're all paid to, you know what they're paid to do. So I bought your books and printed all I could. Incredible easy reads for all. Yeah, and make sure you print out the free lesson plans that go with the books. Really cool stuff. And then I teach a course, Foundations of Propaganda, using the Cubs to Bears books. So a lot of really cool stuff with that. And I have another one coming out soon. So, but yeah, I wanted to give a talk today on the financial system and how it works. And I think it's important that everyone understands it. Now, I actually think it's more important that your children understand how to make money and the difference between assets and liabilities, why it's better to live a life where you don't have debt. Now, I know a lot of financial gurus will say, you want to have as much debt as possible. And I get why they're saying that, because the system is debt. It doesn't really matter. And if you take out, $10 million in loans and it doesn't work out, who cares? Just file bankruptcy and you're back to zero. You're at zero now anyway. You might as well take out the loans. The reason I don't like debt is because I think the majority of people aren't functioning that way where they're buying 20 rental properties. The majority of people are taking out debt that's a liability, where they are basically taking out a mortgage to live in a house, and that mortgage becomes crippling to their finances for the rest of their lives, and it makes people easy to control. So it's like your employer comes along and says, hey, you have to get this procedure, and you don't want to get it, but hey, you might lose your job and you have to pay a mortgage. That's a problem. You become easy to control. Or, you better not say this on social media, or the way they play the game. So I don't like people being in debt. I just feel like it's an instrument of control, and that you live a better life when you live within your means. And that's how I think people should do it. Do you ever cover the Second Amendment? Yeah, well, I wrote a book, right? My book is called The Right to Bear Arms, which is on the Second Amendment. And in that propaganda class that I put together, a lot of it's about the Second Amendment and narratives around that. But yeah, I wrote a book on the Second Amendment. So, what's up, man? Yeah, I'm about to finish up, and then Mommy and I have a surprise because we're about to do something fun.
Are we going to the playground?
We're not going to the playground, but we're going somewhere pretty cool. And actually, there might even be a playground there.
Where?
Where?
Yeah.
I don't want to tell you. It wouldn't be a surprise.
Oh.
Wouldn't be much of a surprise if you knew.
Neighbor's house?
Well, think of 20 questions. Remember when we're in the car and we play the game about the questions and you say, is it inside the car or outside the car? And I say outside the car. And then you go, what color is it? And I say green. Right? Those are hints and clues that you can use to guess the surprise. But we'll do that in a minute, all right? Let Daddy finish up the stream.
Is it outside?
It has both indoor and outdoor areas.
Kite?
Not a kite. Although we do fly kites. I see what you're saying.
Where? Where is it?
Well, you'll have to keep asking questions in the car, and we'll see if you...
What color is it?
Well, a lot of it's blue because there's water involved.
I know the water park.
Not the water park, but that was a good guess.
I know the pool.
Which one? Oh, no, it's too cold for the pool today. All right, we'll keep playing the game in the car. We'll see if you can guess it. So, all right, guys, I'm going to call it a stream on that. www.classicallearner.com. Homeschools Connected. It is... What, babe? Oh, Brady, Mom needs you.
Why?
I don't know. She said she needs you. ClassicalLearner.com, Homeschools Connected, and like I said, it's $10 a month with the discount code FREEDOM if you decide to join. If not, freedom isn't free. We have to earn it every day, and I will be back tomorrow morning sometime between 9:30 and 12 to earn said freedom.
Make you have a kite. Bye-bye.
I will now count to 10.
Don't pop your eyeball out. But cover your nose. Bye-bye. And blow it.
With a kite?